In March 2026, an archaeologist's boot pressed into sand near Luxor and found something that shouldn't have been there. Not because it was ancient, but because it was invisible. For 2,000 years, people had walked past the same wall, crushed it with cart wheels, built temporary shelters against it, never once looked down to see what their feet had already crossed, until someone finally did. The structure was Byzantine, dated to approximately 550 CE, 1400 years before Napoleon looked at Egypt and decided the past was worth stealing. 1400 years before modern archaeology existed to document what it contained. Ruin itself was small by the measures of lost cities, roughly the footprint of a suburban house, though the interior had never been excavated, never been mapped, never been entered by anyone living in the modern world. But here's what changes the mathematics. This wasn't a remote discovery. This wasn't a site buried in the Sahara requiring expedition and sacrifice. This was in the cultural layer of Egypt that has been studied, walked, measured, and catalogued for over 2 centuries. This was a door that existed in the margins of the already known, in the gap between two things archaeologists were already looking at. A gloved hand brushed sand from the surface. One corner of worked stone appeared, then another. Falling grains caught light as they scattered, each grain a tiny clock marking the moment something invisible started to become visible. The hand paused, did not continue. The discipline of true archaeology is knowing when to stop revealing and when to wait, to photograph, to measure, to mark the threshold before crossing it. What made this discovery unsettling wasn't its grandeur, it was its ordinariness. The structure was functional, not ornamental. A storage chamber, perhaps. A workshop. The walls were thick enough to suggest something precious had been kept here, but thin enough to suggest it wasn't meant to last forever. This wasn't a monument. This was a room. A room someone closed the door to 1500 years ago and never came back to open. The team mapped the exterior first. Standard protocol. Measure before you enter, measure before you understand. The structure sat in a depression, a natural bowl in the landscape that had collected sand over centuries, burying it not because of catastrophe but because of the simple weight of time and wind. Other ruins surrounded it, already documented, already named. The Byzantine structure existed between them like a word no one had ever read, even though they'd been reading the sentence for 200 years. What archaeology teaches you is that the world is not finished revealing itself, but there's a particular kind of heartbreak in that knowledge. The heartbreak of realizing how much has already been lost, how much we'll never know, how many rooms are still sealed and will remain sealed because there aren't enough lifetimes to open all the doors. This discovery carried that heartbreak because the structure was small, because it had been there all along, because the question it posed wasn't about what was inside, it was about how many other things like this are still invisible, still walked past, still waiting for someone to finally look down. The interior held pottery fragments consistent with the period. No complete vessels, no inscriptions that could be read cleanly, no dramatic treasures that would make the news cycle burn bright for a week before moving on to the next spectacle. Instead, evidence of ordinariness, of life lived in a specific place at a specific time by people whose names we'll never know for purposes we can only guess at. But the real twist arrived when they began to understand the structure's relationship to the ground beneath it. Ground-penetrating radar suggested, not confirmed, that there might be subsurface chambers, that what was visible was only the roof of something deeper, that the door everyone had walked past for 2,000 years might not be the entrance at all. The entrance might be below, might have been covered, might be waiting still. This is where the mathematics of discovery shifts from addition to multiplication. Because if one invisible structure existed here in a place already considered thoroughly explored, then how many others are in the same category, not lost in the desert, not remote, not requiring extraordinary effort to reach, but simply unseen, existing in the negative space between what we've decided to look at, sitting in the margins of the already catalogued world, waiting for someone to finally change the angle of their vision. The discovery in Egypt in 2026 isn't ultimately about a Byzantine structure. It's about the expansion of the possible. It's about the recognition that the world is less finished than we've convinced ourselves it is, that there are still doors, that the map is less complete than we believed when we woke up that morning, that something can exist in plain sight for 2,000 years and still surprise us the moment we actually see it. The real mystery is this: if this was missed, what else are we walking past right now? What's under the sand at your feet? What threshold are you crossing every day without realizing you're crossing it? What room is waiting behind the wall you've already decided is just a wall?